Hi, my name is Andrea Kupfer Schneider, Professor of Law and Director of the Institute for Women's Leadership at Marquette University. In honor of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and in recognition of how important women are in this current election, we are delighted to bring you our virtual conference on women's suffrage and innovation. How is innovation linked with voting? To understand both the history of the women's suffrage movement and the current evolution of voting rights is to examine innovation in political activism, intellectual empowerment, and inventive women. We hope you will enjoy all 8 segments on this important subject. Thank you for joining us. I am delighted to bring you segment number 6 in our virtual conference on women's suffrage and innovation. This panel conversation brings together the women at the forefront of the voting rights movement in Milwaukee: Ann Jacobs, Angela Lang, and Christine Neumann Ortiz. Come hear from them how the women of Milwaukee will choose the next president. Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Schneider, and I'm the director of the Institute for Women's Leadership at Marquette University. I am delighted that this afternoon we are welcoming a panel of women activists, women in the fight to secure our voting rights this year in 2020. There's nothing more important than in the 100th anniversary of women being granted the right to vote than women involved in continuing that fight and making sure that all women and all men have access to the ballot box. So today we're going to hear from 3 activists, 3 women at the forefront, and we are really looking forward to a wide-ranging conversation of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what we can learn from them. With no further ado, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and their organizations, and I'll start with Angela Lang.
Hello, thanks for having me. My name is Angela Lang, and I am the founder and executive director of BLOC, Black Leaders Organizing for Communities, which is a year-round civic engagement organization. We don't just knock doors and do outreach just a couple weeks or a couple months before an election. We want to make sure that we're engaging specifically Black folks in our community as often as possible and doing some civic education to making sure that more people are civically engaged and think of themselves as people that are civically engaged on a year-round basis and not just voting.
Great. Thanks, Angela. Ann, you are next.
My name is Ann Jacobs. I'm chair of the state of Wisconsin's Election Commission. That is a partisan body made up of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. We are the supervising entity for 1,850 separate municipal clerks who run Wisconsin's elections. So we oversee all of them as well as 72 counties and provide the statewide resources and instruction on voting administration for the state.
Great, and Christine, bring us home.
My name is Christine Neumann Ortiz. I'm the executive director and founder of Voces de la Frontera Action. Voces is a statewide organization. We have chapters throughout the state, as well as youth-led chapters, which are called YES, Youth Empowered in the Struggle. And since our inception, focused on 3 core areas of organizing. One of them, rights, access to education, as well as immigration justice. We started doing electoral-based organizing in 2004, and we've been doing that in every election since then.
Terrific. So I think it'd be really interesting for everybody to understand exactly what motivated you to get involved in the first place. And I'm wondering if there was a particular incident or event that got you involved in politics, or if this was something that you always grew up knowing that this was the way you were going to be using your time and talent. And for this, Ann, I'm going to start with you.
So I'm a lawyer by trade and a personal injury attorney. I have my own law firm. I was active in election work by virtue of being a lawyer and being asked to volunteer to go poll watch in the early 2000s. It seemed like a natural fit because as a kid, my mom, who was part of the League of Women Voters, would take us to the polling places for reporting at the end of the night. And so I became active in the nonpartisan election protection work, and through that grew my involvement in election work And then when the state of Wisconsin created the State Elections Commission, having gotten rid of its previous administrative body, I was appointed by the state senator, then the minority leader, Jen Schilling, to a 5-year term on this body based upon that work I had done in the larger organizing and supervision of poll sites through election protection.
Thanks. And Christine, how did you get involved?
I got involved mostly when I was growing up. We moved around a lot, and I'm the daughter of immigrants. My dad's originally from Germany. My mom's from Mexico. And having the opportunity to move to different places, both inside the United States and outside, it right away makes you a critical thinker about the things you see and how we live as a society. And but I would say my formative years were definitely in Alabama when I went to high school there. And there was a very strong Jim Crow culture there. Even though Jim Crow was no longer there, you still saw it and felt it. And a lot of like intolerance, I would say. And so I saw injustice, but didn't know what you could do about it. And so it wasn't until I came to UW-Madison and got involved in student activism and conversations about why is society the way it is and how can we challenge inequality and do that together, that I really got hooked. And once I understood that and became a part of it, I've committed to it. It's a wonderful thing. I want more people. We need everyone involved in it.
Terrific. And Angela, tell us your story.
Yeah, so I am born and raised in Milwaukee. I come out of student organizing. I didn't intend to be an organizer. I started at UW-Milwaukee as pre-med. I thought I was going to be a doctor, do Doctors Without Borders. I really started to get involved with the ACLU. So I did a lot of nonpartisan voter registration work. Around the time 2007, 2008, we started to hear about photo ID and how that would impact college students. So I did a lot of nonpartisan activism, specifically around, voter suppression efforts. And then in 2010 was when Governor Walker was elected, and shortly after there were the protests in the Capitol. So I really like to credit Scott Walker for kind of radicalizing me and making me and pushing me to do a lot more partisan work. So pretty much since 2010, started to do a little bit more partisan work. When I left UWM, my first job out of college was for the Service Employees International Union, where I was from 2013 to 2016. Worked for a group called For Our Future, a super PAC that was really just dedicated to electing Hillary Clinton. That did not happen. And then out of a lot of frustrations, including the outcome of the election, but also how our community was blamed for the election, was really, really frustrating, and really wanted me to really try to create some infrastructure about how do we do some long-term organizing and really build long-term Black political power here in Milwaukee. And that brings me to BLOC.
Okay, so we're going to dive in a little bit more to each of your personal experiences in the organizations and really what skills you've brought to the table. I was struck listening to Doris Kearns Goodwin this past summer talking about many of our excellent presidents and other political leaders in the United States and in history, and she's really the doyenne of American history, presidential history. And she talked about how leaders have 4 skills: empathy, humility, resilience, and hope. And you've each touched in some way, both on things that frustrated you and on hope. We need hope in order to make things happen. And I'd love you to talk about how some of your day-to-day work in your organization really utilizes one of those skills, at least one of those skills. And if you have an example of a time that you've used one of those, that would be great. And Angela, I'm going to turn this right back to you.
Yeah, I think what stands out to me the most is empathy. I think to do your job effectively as an organizer, you need to understand and have that empathy and compassion of where folks are at. That's one of the main things that I learned while being an organizer. There were some times I couldn't directly relate to the home care workers I was organizing, but having people feel that I did the best that I could to understand. And in some cases, there is the firsthand human connection. And I think that's important. And I think when people feel that they're being listened to, when they feel heard, when people get some sort of compassion that they're not used to, that's how you really build more of the transformative relationships. And so I think that's something that is really important to our work, and actually kind of inspires hope in some sense. We pride ourselves in being able to have really deep relationships with folks on a year-round basis. Normally we'd be out in the field talking to folks where they are, but being able to not just talk about the election, but say, hey, you know, the world is kind of on fire right now. How are you? Do you need to be connected to resources? If so, which ones do you need? How best can we show up for you? All of that I think is really important in the world of organizing, and I think can really inspire some hope if people feel connected to an organization and feel that hopefully BLOC is their political and civic engagement home.
I'm just going to ask you to pursue that for a second. How does that combination of showing up, that empathy, really, I mean, what do you hope to accomplish? Why is empathy important? And really, why is BLOC in some ways different than other political organizations on the ground? You mentioned in passing that your community was arguably blamed for 2016. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your approach is different than other political organizations in times.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people just try to mobilize and turn out folks without really trying to understand where folks are at, what they're carrying, what their issues are. And I think a lot of times it can be incredibly transactional. If you're knocking on a door in October saying, hey, don't forget to vote, you know, when people haven't seen you before, haven't built up this relationship, it seems that you only are knocking on our door caring about one thing. And a lot of times people view our community as poll numbers and statistics and votes and commodities. And I think it's important to let people know that we care about them a lot more than their ability to vote. There are some folks on our team, unfortunately, given the laws and the rules in the state of Wisconsin, who haven't had their voting rights restored. And instead of overlooking them, bringing them in and say, here are all the things you can do to be civically engaged. If we really want to build long-term power, we need to make sure that people understand that they're a lot more than votes, and have people really understand the agency that they have within themselves in a political system that really wasn't meant for us to participate in and wasn't designed for us to participate in. And I think being able to have those conversations, meet people where they're at. If people don't feel that voting is helpful to them or going to change their life, then let's have those conversations, and let's do it on a year-round basis. Let's not just do it a couple weeks before an election, because it really doesn't send the signal that we care about them outside of how they vote.
Great, thanks. All right, Christine, I'm going to turn to you now to ask you to think about one or more of the skills that you've used and to give us an example of how that's worked for your organization.
Well, I think all of the characteristics that you mentioned, resiliency, courage, humility, compassion, all of those things do have to go together, definitely. But if you were going to ask me to really think about one in particular, I think it's in the nature of someone who is an organizer that you must instill and be really centered in humility, because you're trying to, you know, build a collective group. And so that requires that, you know, the role of the organizer is really, you know, like Angela said, it's to listen, to meet people where they're at, to instill hope, to instill dignity, to figure out a solution together and move forward and learn from that, and constantly learn and grow from that process. For me, Voces has a national and international reputation for really being able to scale up in, you know, by tens of thousands of ways, not just in isolated, like what I'd call mobilization, but that requires organization. Organization is deeper than mobilization, because it really is about each person in their workplace, in their school, in their community, in their church, really engaging those around them and moving them into action. And so our capacity to do that has been that Voces, since its inception, and started here in Wisconsin in 1998, though it started earlier in Texas. it has always been very much community-led, member-led. And I think there's many proud moments, but I think one that I'll share because Angela's on this panel, and so I'll share one where we worked together, and that was in the wake of the Trump elections, the 2016, which of course was, devastating. Didn't win the popular vote, but this is one of the structural problems that we have, right, in this undemocratic system, is that college on the fact that Trump won, and in the wake of that, we saw, people emboldened to be bullies in schools and workplaces, and striking, really, really striking, and devastating for the community, especially, I know for the immigrant community, it was because people knew what was coming their way right away. And so at the time, former Sheriff Clark was in office, and he was going to bring to Milwaukee 287G, a program that legalizes racial profiling and turns, in this case, local officers into an arm of immigration to persecute, profile, incarcerate, and separate families and deport, and just for being an immigrant, and so we use this process to involve people in a very one of our what we call Day Without Latinx and Immigrants, which is a statewide community general strike, no work, no school, no shopping, but into that, and that was powerful. 60,000 people on the street. But in addition to that, working with Angela and others as part of the Coalition for People's Sheriff, we brought some synergy. I think there was a real synergetic moment where, this was such a sheriff that had done so much harm to people within the jail, and then just his, he's very Trump-like. And so it really created a very synergetic moment where we were able to really tie the struggles of Black, brown communities against policies of incarceration and racism, and force him out of office, and then actually help elect and hold accountable the incoming sheriff, who on his own was also driven by social justice principles to run for office and elect him. So it was a very, I think, beautiful moment. And those are the kind of stuff that takes time. And I know there will be other beautiful moments to come.
Terrific, thank you. Anne, and I'll turn to you in terms of a time that you've used one of the skills, empathy, humility, resilience, or what was it? Empathy, humility, resilience, and hope, right? One of those we should actually keep to, and how you use that. Muted.
My apologies. I think resilience and hope are kissing cousins, because resilience means continuing the struggle, and the only reason to continue doing it is because you have hope. So when you look at, and in the context of what I do as chair of the Elections Commission over the past, going on 4 years now, there have been big wins for voting that then get taken away. So there was the order that prevented voter ID from being implemented, and then it was taken away. And then it was the district court stopping some of the laws in Wisconsin that related to early voting and student IDs, and that court case was won. And then just this past month, the Seventh Circuit undid that. And I think that one of the most challenging parts of advocating for your position is the fact that you're going to lose, right? You're going to lose some of the time. And it's also hard as a lawyer, you try a case, you lose it. But I think that if you can do your best to, mourn overnight, dust yourself off, and stand up and keep moving forward. And so in the context of the State Elections Commission, it is, okay, well, that's the new court case. And you saw it before our April 7th election, where the district court said one thing, the Seventh Circuit said another, then the Supreme Court said something else, and it's all coming back over a period of 3 or 4 days. And all you can do is say, okay, we're going to keep going. We're going to do the best we can to make that election happen and make people able to safely vote. So I think that those are the two sides of the same coin. Get yourself back up because you have the hope that the next time will be better and that you can do better.
So as an educational institution here, we are obviously focused on making sure that people are educated. But I'm wondering if each of you could speak about how that education of voter suppression that you've talked about, Anne, right? Whether or not people have the details of the Seventh Circuit, the Supreme Court, this, that, or the other. We're talking about the 100th anniversary of suffrage, and yet we know that not every woman was automatically given the right to vote. Right? Native American later, African American not until the Voting Rights Act, right? And so on and so forth. And so the struggle absolutely continues. How useful is it when we are trying to motivate and to activate to use this history? Is history helpful, or are people like, oh, for God's sake, right? Checking out. And Christine, I'm going to turn that back to you.
I think practice and history together are very, very important. And to learn and share some of that history. I think oral history is part of that tradition, even learning from our family and generations, like when I listen to my mom or my grandma and their experiences, women growing up, who definitely know that in a short time period, living generations, there's been greater inequality and less rights, and it's important to know that that's a product of struggle, and that to keep it going. But I would say, especially as it relates to voting, it's important because both my parents are naturalized U.S. citizens, so naturally I think for most naturalized citizens, they really cherish the vote because they've had to work really hard to get it. And for a long time, I actually was an activist and didn't vote. I was one of those people that felt, was definitely dismissive of it. And I came to voting really through the experience of the immigrant rights movement, when I remember we were lobbying a congressional person, and it was just so clear that this person would do absolutely nothing for us. And the only solution was to vote this person out of office. And just seeing how people were being disenfranchised from the vote, it wasn't just that they were being taken advantage of. One of the ways they were being taken, in so many ways, and one of those ways was the ability to vote. And so just, appreciating the blood, sweat, and tears that has come out of that struggle. And that even now, for me, one of the most important things to think about was how this was something that was once reserved for wealthy white men with property, and it's been just a history of struggle to win greater democratic rights. And we wouldn't see the level of voter suppression that we continue to see if there wasn't some power to it. And if you see elections in and of themselves as an end all be all, you'll be disappointed. But if you see it as part of the continuum of a social movement struggle, then you understand it for what it is, and you don't ignore it, but you also don't place all your bets on it.
Right. Angela and I listened to a panel, I know last week, in which they had the amazing statistic that of the population of the United States, only 6% voted in the election for George Washington, because that is who was eligible to vote out of all of the inhabitants. So yes, there is progress. And so Angela, when you heard that stat, is that a statistic that you roll out when you're knocking on people's doors? Is education or some part of the history persuasive there?
Yeah, I had no idea about that stat until I heard it. But I guess
it was a great one.
I guess it doesn't surprise me given the time period, right? And who was not allowed to exercise their voice through voting. I think, you know, in addition to Christine, I think we need to have honest conversations about the role of elections. A lot of our work is electoral focused, and we take really great pride in that. But we also don't want to sell our community a pipe dream that if they just vote, then everything will magically be okay after election day, and that voting itself is not going to get us the change that we seek. It may be a driving factor for change, but if we really want to change things in the long run, we need to have that year-round presence and that year-round engagement. Even folks that aren't able to cast a ballot, they're still able to hold folks accountable. They're still able to make sure that their voices are heard. And for us, actually the education part has always been very important to us. You know, our leadership development has been something that's very crucial to our team. So, you know, going back to the question of how are we different from other field and GOTV efforts, is that I've been a part of organizations where I've processed people's paperwork. I've briefly trained them on the script and I sent them out within an hour. And it's, again, very transactional. Hey, just go get as many people to vote for a candidate as possible. At BLOC, we put our folks through 30 hours of training minimum, because we want to make sure that they're having more impactful conversations. So instead of saying, hey, don't forget to vote for candidate X for state Supreme Court, it's like, do you know what the state Supreme Court does? Do you know that they're 10-year terms? Do you know that a lot of social issues, including voting rights, have gone in front of the state Supreme Court? Being able to do that is incredibly important. And what we've done since we've had to adjust with COVID, just like anyone else, our team can only text and phone bank so much before they're getting tired of it, before they're getting bored, because they're used to being out in the field. So we're giving our team homework assignments, you know, where people are like, how was the April 7th election allowed to happen? We gave them a homework assignment about gerrymandering and why people are able to act without impunity, understanding the districts that they're in. After John Lewis's passing, we had people research about his legacy and the work that he had done, because we're not taught all of that. And so we're using this opportunity to provide homework assignments with our folks at least once a week, so people understand the connection and the parallels to the work that we're doing today. And it didn't happen overnight. And we want people to have that broader context, and people also feel more deeply connected to the work and to the organization as well, when we realize it's something bigger than just an election day, and it's bigger than us too.
Terrific. All right, Anne, I'll let you bring us home thinking about education. What should people know? How does education work or not work? And I think about sometimes the work of the Election Commission. Would other commissioners be persuaded by the entire history, or they think they know the history anyway?
So what I think the history of voting rights and the lack of voting rights teaches us as we're coming into what we could call, I suppose, the modern era of voting, is there's basically two mindsets about voting. And one mindset literally goes back to that 6%. And it is that voting is some amazing privilege that only the worthy get to participate in. So you must be organized and have all the right documents. You must register weeks or months ahead of time, depending on the state you're in. You must be able to take off work on election day. You must have transportation to the polls. Like this litany of entitlements that you must have to be worthy of being allowed to vote. And that is there's a direct line from that philosophical view down to that 6% of landed gentry in the 1700s being allowed to vote. Okay, so what is our modern view of voting? And our modern view of voting, really, we have to start talking about it in recognition of that history and in rejection of that history. So the philosophy has got to be, everybody should be able to vote. People with felony convictions should be able to vote. People in prison should be able to vote. People who are late should be able to vote. People who procrastinate should be able to vote. And why is this? Because the people we elect represent procrastinators, felons, people who are in jail. So all of those people need to have a voice in our representatives. So we can't talk about the importance of embracing that level of universal entitlement to vote. And you have to do that by explaining why the other view is rooted in the racist, sexist policies that came out of our founding fathers.
And I've heard you speak on this. I love the idea of procrastinators unite, right? Tomorrow. But it's right, even procrastinators have a right to vote, as do students, as do people without transportation to the polls, as do, right, pick your demographic that gets disenfranchised by virtue of where we are today. But the procrastinator thing particularly resonates with me, right? Everybody has the right to vote, even when you're not organized. Of course, looking at the three of you, you are really, really organized. So I'd love for you, if there's one or two thoughts that you have. You're all women who are leading your organizations who've chosen to step up. I think for people watching this, they'd be curious, is there something about either growing up thinking about sexism or suffrage or something like that that motivated you? Or is there something that you think being a woman now leading your organizations makes a difference, either easier or harder? And if you don't have an answer to that, that's fine. But Angela, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think my whole career, both professional and in student organizing, I felt the impact of being a woman, but specifically being a Black woman, of what it meant to be the angry Black woman, because I was leading protests on campus, to be tone policed, to say that I'm too aggressive or I'm too harsh when I'm trying to hold people, namely white men, accountable. And so I think even in this, line of work today in this role, there are times that people only know me in settings where I'm trying to hold people accountable and check people on their behavior. And I have to actually have conversations with colleagues and say, I'm not normally angry. It's just you all don't see the nice side of me because you only see me having to hold people accountable because of their language or their behavior, specifically when it comes to the Black community and Black women or Black trans women. And so I guess what I would say to that is that it's hard. It's hard, to Black women and women of color. There's a certain element and there's a certain layer, because not only are you dealing with the sexism, you're dealing with the racism, and it's so much intertwined, and it gets to you. For me, I am very honest and open with folks that I suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's due to, years of being in meetings where I was talked over and looked down upon, and actually just even looked through as if I wasn't even in that meeting. And I'm honest about it because I want people to feel that they don't think that they have to be perfect to step into these roles or to be active or to feel, sometimes you have to feel your feelings some days. You have to feel that imposter syndrome and work your way through it, but it's not, that shouldn't stop us. So I say this to folks that are watching, not as a way to deter people, but to really understand and to know that you can be a full woman, you can be a full person with complex and intersecting identities, and it may be tough, but really our existence in these spaces challenge the status quo and really can be radical. And so we need to be able to push forward and have that support system around us that's able to hold us up when things get kind of tough.
There's a wonderful cartoon that says, what's the difference between aggressive and assertive? And the answer is your gender. So, Anne, I'm wondering if you've ever faced anything like that, either in this position or elsewhere as well, that you'd care to comment on. Muted.
By day, I'm a plaintiff personal injury lawyer, and that is a very male-dominated firm. Take a look at, or field rather, take a look at all the television ads you see for lawyers. And there might be a token woman lawyer in the background of them, but it's always, the white guy in a suit in the front. So in that regard, it is sort of a interesting place to be because it's both a niche, but also kind of a lonely spot to be. So yes, you run into that a lot, and and then you get told you're just supposed to lean in and negotiate harder, and then you get told that you're bossy, pushy, a lot of other words that end in Y that aren't appropriate for a seminar. And what's interesting is in this role, having to sort of prove my bona fides in terms of my knowledge of the topic and understanding of it. And I, you know, when Angela says that, you know, to be looked through and around, that still happens. You know, I was in a hearing the other day and a colleague told me I was talking too much. And I kind of thought at my age that that wasn't a comment I needed to have. But yet there it was. So it can be a challenge sometimes, but we just have to push on.
All right. And Christina, thoughts, Christine, either about something that makes it easier or harder, or how your gender helped motivate you in this?
I'm very grateful because I have very strong mom, and she definitely, who comes from her own mom was widowed and left with 6 children, so that's just, you know, there's a lot of that kind of empathy and love that they really were able to work through hard times. And my mom's always had a lot of her Mexican heritage and instilled that in me, and just a lot of that sense of dignity and being in different nations. I think it's just something that has been very important for me. In my own work, I would say that where I, as an organizer, was not taking for granted that intentionality around quality, you know, good representation, not token representation, but good representation, and not always taking it for granted, but the employee having that intentionality within the org and then the campaign work that we're doing. So I recall once we were supporting Latino workers who were being threatened with termination. And the women who really led the fight, especially at the end, it was all women who really led that fight. And then when it was time to elect formal leadership, none of the women were elected. And I had just, you know, assumed that the people who were clearly doing the work, the hardest work, would naturally be recognized for it. And so that was just a good learning lesson. So I just think it's something to always keep an eye for. And I do think there's a difference, I think we all agree, between like this tokenism and, you know, there's lots of very strong, capable, progressive women, and, you know, not in and of itself just having someone there. And I just got to say, when learning from gender, I have a transgender daughter who's awesome activist. And so I've also challenged my own, you know, it's been a growing experience for me to recognize the diversity of gender identities too.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so I'm going to slowly lead us toward the end of our conversation with a couple closing questions. And the first thing that I want us to think about is kind of the dark side here. What's the thing that's keeping you up at night? We are 2 and a bit more months before the election. We are rapidly moving toward that date. What's keeping you up? And I'll start, Anne, I'm going to start with you on this one. What's your greatest concern at this point?
It's been trying to address the issues of the post office and people being able to get their ballots and get them returned if they want to vote absentee. I am worried about a resurgence of the coronavirus at such a level that we lose all of our poll workers again right before November. That's what happened in April. It wasn't that people wanted it to be that way. It's that Milwaukee went from 2,000 poll workers to like 300 over a period of 2 weeks. So that worries me. And then the issue of the legitimacy of the counting of the ballots afterwards, the importance of those processes, and that I don't want Wisconsin to be held up as an example of things going wrong.
Okay, well, that's a good list. We could alphabetize that, put it in chronological order. All right, Christine, how would you add to that list? What's keeping you up at night?
You said one word, so I'll put that one word as Trump. That's what's keeping me up at night. If we give him any opening to prevail in this election. I think it does worry me when people think of, you know, that this is a regular election, just as 2016 was a regular election between choices. I do consider this a very historic turning point since we're reflecting on history. One of the things that got me involved in activism was, once I was involved, looking back at history and looking at it from a different perspective and thinking World War II and the rise of fascism didn't even have to get there if people recognized it for what it was and if people united and beat that back. And all these people didn't have to die in this like level of horrific genocide didn't have to happen, or attempted genocide. You know, we have an administration that is explicit in its support of white nationalist ideology. And by that, I don't mean just racism. It's like, you know, it's a dictatorial government that truly believes in violent means of harming people who they define as other, as less worthy. And it's all these coded words, make America great again. You know, that's very clear. It's hearkening back to Jim Crow, to Civil War, to all of this. And it's every day, it's something surprising. I mean, even, you know, these federal troops being brought out for these multiracial, Black Lives Matter protests. These are funded by Department of Homeland Security to take people away, right, in unmarked vehicles. I mean, this is all everything that's been done, the level of harm that is being done, the caging of children, the formal separation policy, and celebrating that, like that they celebrate that policy. You know, there's this weird conversation happening during their convention where they're saying what they're saying to validate, and what they've actually done is striking. So I just think it's extremely dangerous moment, and we must prevail. And we know Wisconsin is considered like a national tipping point. Black, Latino, and youth are a critical part of that. And anyone else who like didn't participate or regrets how they did, it's like we have to get involved, and especially if you're from Wisconsin, because we are considered the tipping point for the country. We have an undemocratic structure where we're facing, and we have to overcome it. And we're only going to do that through organizing.
Angela, what's keeping you up at night?
Everything. I have a really hard time sleeping. I suffer from insomnia really bad. And even when I'm supposed to be like on vacation, woke up today at like 6 a.m. I think, you know, in addition to Christine, what keeps me up in short terms is white supremacy. But it's also, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing, whatever that is? These are really challenging and unprecedented times. And so I think a lot of us are all trying to learn how to balance our own collective grief and trauma that we're experiencing in this time with also doing the work, leading an organization, you know, still showing up for the city budget hearing, all of these different things. And you know, what I've learned, I think, this week is that sometimes it feels that leaders are expected to compartmentalize what everyone else is feeling and dealing with because there's work to do, not understanding that we're still healing and grieving the same way that everyone else is. And so, you know, I think for me, 2020 just feels like one of those years where there's something else, and it's becoming very difficult to catch up when every day now there's a new attack on Black and brown bodies. I feel a lot of pressure. We've all read the think pieces about how important Wisconsin is. You know, as Christine said, we know how important it is the communities of color are, and BLOC can sit at the intersection of that. Voces, we sit at the intersection of that. There's a lot of pressure on our own communities and on our organizations, and then we're asked to deliver, in a sense, under really tremendous circumstances that no one has ever been used to. This is my first presidential cycle in this role at BLOC. This is BLOC's first presidential cycle as an organization. So I already felt like a little bit of pressure, but a challenge that we were up to. But 2020 decided to be a little bit more challenging than than any other year. I joke around with friends and I say, you know, every single time it's, you know, there's something new that happens. It feels like we're in another level of Jumanji and someone needs to finish the game already, because there's everything from murder hornets to Kanye West running for president and everything in between, and making an enemy out of the post office, right? Like, we never thought these things would happen, and to still constantly have to adapt to them while still processing and learning is very difficult. And you know, always thinking about, am I doing the best that I can in my position and in my role, not just for the organization but for the team.
All right, so as we wrap up, I'm going to do this in reverse alphabetical. So Christine, you're going to be on the hook first. Just for us to think for a minute, what's our message? If people they've watched this, they're compelled, they're frustrated, they're interested, they're motivated, what do we want our viewers to go do? Obviously vote. What else can they be doing between now and the election, on the election day? What are ways that everybody can make a difference? And I am going to ask you to keep it nice and short so that we will close with a bang here. Christine, you're going to be on first.
So to get involved, that's the big thing. Not just vote, but involve others in whatever way. And I will make a pitch to what Voces de la Frontera Action is doing. Our contribution to Wisconsin is to build out a network of 23,000 Latinx and multiracial youth voters to help register and turn out, and to continue to organize for the change we want post-elections. So I would invite folks to participate in that effort. And you don't have to be eligible to vote. We call that person a vocero, but it's about engaging and motivating and helping the people you know, and to be part of this larger network.
Terrific. And Anne?
Okay, two things I want people to do. Number one, if they are comfortable doing so, to please be a poll worker. Sign up now, get the training now. More bodies at the polls makes for safer voting for everyone. Number two, if you are watching this on a computer, you are probably computer savvy enough to be able to help those around you get an absentee ballot. So if you are a student, help grandma and grandpa upload their IDs and get their absentee ballots. If you are in your community, help the people around you, your neighbor, your friend, whatever, who don't understand that, you know, fancy computer internet thing. Help them get their absentee ballots, or help them know where and how to vote. And if you do those two things, it'll help all of us increase and have a safe, effective election in November.
Thanks, Anne. And Angela, bring us home.
I think, you know, in addition to Anne, is making a plan to vote and then making a backup plan. We know how April 7th went. We know that there were some concerns. You know, making sure that people feel comfortable and safe to explore all the options, whether there's drop-off boxes or people are going to request their ballot early, you know, have a backup plan in case, you know, the ballot doesn't come, whatever that is. We're telling folks to make a backup plan as well. And the last thing that I'll say is, you know, BLOC and Voces and everybody else, we can do as much outreach as we can, but the most impactful messenger is you to your own friends and family. So go through your phone, you know, find 5-10 different people who may be on the fence about voting, who may not know the impact or the importance, and start to have those conversations with them, because those are going to be the most fruitful and impactful conversations. And if I have my team text your people, people will be moved by you and understanding and making the case of why this election is so important. So take out your phone and call and reach out to at least 5 to 10 people that you are committed to encouraging them to vote, walking them through the process between now and election day.
Terrific. Thank you so much, ladies. This was just wonderful. I hope it left everybody inspired, engaged, transformed all of our goals for the Institute of Women's Leadership here at Marquette University. Thank you so very much. On behalf of the entire planning committee, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Please check out the other segments of our conference on our website. And please do let us know how you utilized the resources provided. Our feedback form and email address are also located on our website. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, remember to vote.